Welcome, everyone, to the first installment of CI Officer Goes Off the Grid. But we're going to have some fun with this one. So we can put all that aside for a little while and do something that's kind of fun. We're going to be talking about how I went off the grid and why I went off the grid and what a blessing it has been to us ever since we did. It's become the love of our life. And what I did was I took this and I replaced it with this. So that's my new weapon, so to speak. I want to talk about today, as I mentioned, why I became a prepper and why I think most people should consider that same thing. Let's look at some of the slides that I put together, and I'll go through some of this for you, and we'll talk about it. All right, that is, of course, me patched in with our off-the-grid farm. And what I'm going to do through this series is go through each one of these functional buildings, how I designed them and how I built them. And let me begin by saying I had never done carpentry work before in my young life. When we moved out to this piece of property, and you can see the woods in the background and the vines, that's what it looked like when I first started clearing the land. But then I'll explain why we moved out to this piece of land in the first place. But that is a picture of our farm. And I'm going to get into each one of these buildings one by one and hopefully give you all at least some beginning ideas of how to do this on each phase of an off-the-grid farm so you can start dreaming the dream and having the vision. All righty. I love the analogy of the matrix because we are essentially in a system, a matrix system, a system of debt where everybody is basically has to get into debt at one point or the other, whether it's your $300,000-$400,000 mortgage, your credit cards, on and on and on it goes. Household debt is huge in America, and that's a form of bondage. It's a form of slavery. There's a verse that says, the debtor is servant to the lender. So the majority of us have been servants to the banks. And as I'll show you coming up, that's not a good thing. So I love the analogy of the matrix and the red pill. And how do you start an off-the-grid farm if you are planning, dreaming on doing that? Well, same way you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. And that's how I'm going to show you this series, one piece at a time. So you can begin thinking about this. Maybe it'll help some of you that are already off the grid. But I think the time has come to do this series. And it's about time we did something that's kind of fun. Now, why did I become a prepper? Well, essentially, I uncovered a vulnerability inside the CIA, which put our agents at risk for assassination. That vulnerability existed in every embassy worldwide. Basically, I stumbled over it, and there was a lady who was working with me at the time that thought this could be a problem and told me I had to look into it before she went to her next assignment. I want to give her credit for that. Her name was Renee. I can't say her last name, of course. But as I proceeded on with digging into this thing, I found it appeared that any foreign agent could go into any of our embassies and identify our covert personnel pretty easily. I did that study, completed that report, submitted it to CIA management. The document itself was lost, quote unquote, or destroyed 3 times. It was removed from the headquarters server, my report was, and I was called on the secure line, threatened and told to drop it. I went outside the CIA to a former decorated CI officer with Department of State, IG. They took over the investigation, found out it was worse than even I thought, and published a stinging rebuke on the agency for putting the lives of its agents at risk for over 10 years, and published it to the entire intelligence community. Of course, at that point, I knew basically I had a laser dot on my back. So I was put on a base with my family, ordered to move onto that base. Turns out the house was full of toxins. And since we have left that facility, and you can see the entire case at fortheloveoffreedom.net. We're not sure exactly what that toxin was, although it was identical to exposure to mycotoxins, which is a biochemical weapon. So our family was poisoned on this base. I collected evidence, sent it to the CIA, and once again, as is their procedure, they covered up the entire case, threatened me from reporting it to anyone, and told me to drop it. My family was desperately ill. My son, almost terminal. He still is having serious physical problems today, and I've set up a GoFundMe account for him and my other kids, but especially for him. So the CIA covered that up and basically was letting my family die, whether it was intentional to get to me or not. I can tell you that is their MO. So it was apparent that's what they were doing. As I filed a personal injury suit against the CIA, our house was broken into. A chemical was painted on the ceiling. We were followed. Our house was bugged, and it got pretty nasty. So I personally witnessed the NSA surveillance, the CIA break-ins and buggings. They were actually bugging my family and following my wife and kids. Highly illegal, obviously, but they don't really care about the law when it comes to covering up their criminal activity. And I learned that. I loved the CIA. I risked my life several times for it on one-way missions on an anti-terrorism assault team, defending our embassy personnel against terrorist attacks. And I love the agency. There's many good people in the working levels of the CIA. It's at the top of the CIA where the corruption is, just like the FBI and agencies like that that are part of what I call the shadow government, others call the deep state. So I left. I resigned so I could fight the CIA from the outside with a good, courageous attorney without being bugged and followed. So I came out as a whistleblower, and of course, the CIA told me, and not just me, but my wife and kids, they implemented what's called the state secrets privilege, which is a tyrannical privilege where the CIA can shut down any case against it with impunity and seal all the evidence. And that's what they did in our case. They sealed all my evidence, all of which was unclassified, environmental reports, doctor's diagnosis, and the physical condition of my family, especially my wife and kids. Now, my wife and kids were the most precious thing in my life. My children were my reason for joy. I was told I had 6 weeks to live when I was younger. That's a whole other story. But I lived, obviously, but the doctors told me I'd never have children. Then I had 3. So they're the most important thing in my life, obviously. And they had become seriously sick with this toxin that was in the house. So as they say, you can mess with a man, but you do not mess with his family. They messed with my family. I came out as a whistleblower. You can find all the documents that I revealed that they tried to hide on fortheloveoffreedom.net. And I'll show you those links at the end. So, other reasons, and these are reasons for us all. We want to become free from the debt false currency matrix, as I called it earlier. The Federal Reserve, which was established in 1913, is not. It's neither federal, and it has no reserves, especially it has no gold. So it has no gold. What it's been doing through quantitative easing has been printing fake money. And our debt is growing and growing and growing, and that debt is going to burst. Everyone is stuck in that system right now. One of my points humbly from these series is to encourage people to get unstuck from that system. We want freedom from fragile utilities, electric and water, brownouts, blackouts. If there is a bubble burst in the U.S. debt, you can be sure that some of these utilities will be shut down. They're already, for example, in Florida, increasing the cost of regular utilities, electric, by 20%. That's going to continue. The water, of course, is full of all kinds of stuff. It's full of antibiotics that people have peed down the drain. It's full of fluoride, big controversy on what fluoride does to young children, especially. It's full of all kinds of stuff that are not purified at the water treatment plants. So having your own water, of course, from a well or spring eliminates that. Freedom from food shortages. If there's any crisis, you can see this before a hurricane. Boom, everything's off the shelves, all the necessities within 48 hours max. So if something happens, you cannot depend on that. It will be gone. And if there's a bubble burst in the U.S. economy, it's going to be gone in a matter of hours. So it's good to be aware of that. I mentioned freedom from tainted food and water. You have the freedom to grow your own food, eat healthy food and water, and prevent disease. Notice I said prevent disease. Doctors, God bless them. I love them. A couple close friends of mine are doctors, but one of them in particular advised me they have no training in their medical education on disease prevention. None, zero. And that's not their fault. They got enough to learn to become a doctor. So it's kind of up to us to take care of that. And in terms of disease prevention, and eating organic, healthy food, of course, is a good step in that direction. On our little farm, we still believe in the Constitution. You can get back to a constitutional government. We are in a post-constitutional government now. We've seen that through the mass surveillance of all of us, U.S. citizens, to the tune of 1.5 billion pieces of information today on us from our cell phones, our email, internet use, and even wireless surveillance on all of us. That's a violation of the Fourth Amendment, and it's criminal. And now we see them going after the First Amendment and attacking specifically Christians any chance that they get, but leaving other groups alone, actually promoting Islam and looking the other way when churches are burned and people are killed. There's essentially a Holocaust in the Middle East of genocide of Christians, which the media completely ignores. So back to the Constitution. We have a little constitutional farm here. I love the Constitution. We've had problems in our past. There are things that have happened in America that were wrong and immoral. Fortunately, our constitutional system enabled those to be corrected, the primary one of which is slavery. Huge mistake by the founding fathers. But eventually, it was recognized and a constitutional provision was made to change that. Also, women's right to vote. It was the Constitution that allowed our government to make those important changes. So the Constitution is a wonderful document. It's the most genius document ever drafted in human history. And it has methods to change itself if and when it's necessary. Why prepare? There are many out there who say, well, you know, I'm just going to trust in the Lord, a lot of people say, and what happens, what happens. Or I'm going to put my head in the sand rather and stick to video games and social media. Well, there's a verse in Proverbs, I think that applies. Goes like this, quote, "A prudent man foresees the evil and hides himself, but the simple," another version says foolish, "pass on and are punished." Here it is in the New American Standard Bible. Quote, "A prudent man sees evil and hides himself. The naive proceed and pay a penalty." So is it prudent to prepare when you see an evil coming down the road? Absolutely is. Of course it is. So for those groups out there that think that you shouldn't be prepared, you ought to check these verses out and check out the financial statistics, and perhaps you'll reach another conclusion. Financial crisis is looming in the United States. The U.S. debt will be the U.S. debt will be $30 trillion by 2025. At that point, it will be impossible to pay that off. Eventually, it will burst, and the economy will go into crisis. The global debt, $245 trillion, an unfathomable amount of money. So we're not just looking at a collapse in the United States, we're looking at a collapse in China and some of the other big countries when their debt goes into default. So this is not just a U.S. problem, this is a global problem. News has just come out that one of the largest banks, central banks in the world, the Deutsche Bank, is failing. They have now lost $75 trillion of their derivatives. Now, what is a derivative? Derivatives are serious. Derivative is fake money. It's digital money that's passed back and forth with no gold to back it up, not even any paper to back it up. It's just digits. And a big chunk of our stock market is derivatives, and those tradings are done by computers, not by human beings. So the huge stock market derivatives, I talked about that. The Federal Reserve I mentioned also. The Federal Reserve was created by elitists for elitists in 1913, and since then it has bound our financial markets and the incomes of American people ever since, and still does by raising or lowering interest rates and directly affecting our economy. The Federal Reserve, everything it does is in secret. It's foreign central bank owners that are inside on the board of the Federal Reserve. They're secret. The Federal Reserve has not been directly audited by Congress and the GAO. It proceeds in secrecy. And anybody that follows me knows that I deplore the abuse of secrecy. We talked about the derivatives. The U.S. has abandoned, this is a big one, the U.S. has abandoned gold-based currency. We now have paper dollars. We will have $30 trillion of debt backed up by no gold, worthless paper. And because we abandoned the gold standard in presidents past, it has put us on the precipice of a crisis. And you hear this very rarely in the mainstream media. China and Russia have joined together to abandon the US dollar as the reserve world currency and go with the yuan or the ruble. They're doing that right now, and they're pulling out of the US dollar, and they're dumping US treasuries to start their own world reserve currency. If that happens, it would directly affect the value of our dollar, could cut its value in half or worse. It will cause financial crisis. So this huge debt bubble that we have is going to burst. It has to, mathematically. It has to. No one can stop it. Donald Trump is holding it back, and our economy is doing well right now, but it is impossible to stop this. This huge debt bubble will burst. They just passed the new budget deal, which again raised the debt ceiling, allowing this budget to increase even more. God help our children and grandchildren. Economic collapse is coming. That's not crying into the air or any sort of conspiracy theory. This will happen. You can go to any financial periodical like Zero Hedge or others, any others, and look at the stats. This is coming. The central banks, which are now the central financing system of our country and the world, they were bailed out in 2008 because they were, quote unquote, too big to fail. When the bubble bursts, these banks will start to go down. And when they do, they will start freezing the accounts of their account holders and their shareholders to try to save themselves. So your bank account will be in jeopardy. The financial elite, who I think most of us despise, have created a system that makes them rich, but eventually will cause the entire economy to fail. The just-in-time, it's called the just-in-time system in U.S. stores. What that means is the food gets there via trucks just in time to stock the shelves. If the economy goes down into crisis, the trucking and the food supplies will stop, and just-in-time food on the shelves of stores will disappear, and there will be nothing. You can count on the fact that the government will protect itself under the continuity of government program first, and the American people last. There is no question about that. There will be chaos in the cities. Desperate people that otherwise would be normal, when their children are screaming because they don't have any food to eat, or the water is tainted, or the sewage is backing up. When a man's children are screaming because they have no food to eat and are starving, some people will change, and they will become predators to find food for their family. There will be chaos in the streets and in the city. I am more concerned, frankly, if you look at South Africa, the example of South Africa, I'm more concerned of roving gangs of thugs breaking into houses, killing the occupants, and stealing all of their possessions, which is happening in South Africa. I'm more concerned of that, frankly, than what the government is going to do. So let's get into the subject here that's a little bit more enjoyable, and put on our off-the-grid hat. And in this episode, I want to talk about the composting toilet. Something when I was in biology, I always dreamed of, frankly, just being free from the whole system. And after a great deal of suffering exposing the CIA, here I sit with my dream and an off-grid farm and a composting toilet. As it says, the good Lord causes all things to work together for good. So I'm going to go into a lot of detail on how I built this composting toilet on my Patreon channel, which we have created because YouTube has been eliminating my videos, demonetizing them, and Twitter has also been doing the same. So you can see the full program, and I'll give you this at the end. You can see the full program of Off the Grid and the composting toilet here in particular on patreon.com/Kevin_Shipp, and I'll show you that to you at the end. But this is what it looks like. Now, I want to remind everyone, I had never done any woodwork in my entire life, not to mention carpentry. So what you can do is what I did is I sat down and watched every YouTube video I could on building walls, building the foundation, and there's books out there on building walls. And what I got the most benefit out of was a book on how to build a big wooden shed, which essentially is the shell of a house. And that's what I used to build this, our composting toilet bathroom. You can see the composting toilet to the right. I get into how that works on the Patreon channel, and you can see I plumbed and ran some water in there. That's an old log that was thrown away when they did some land clearing. We took it and used it to make our sink out of. And all of this is off the grid. Everything is powered by solar power. We're not connected to anything. That includes the well and the well pump, which provides water to the entire farm, including the composting toilet here. So I'd encourage you all to go to patreon.com/Kevin_Shipp to look at how I built the composting toilet. There's also a segment on how I built our chicken coop and some kind of interesting things we did there. And I'll walk you through everything I did starting from scratch, from zero, drawing little pictures at night from what I learned on YouTube and from this Building a Shed book. And I walk everyone through that on the Patreon channel. So go check out patreon.com, Kevin_Shipp. And that has protected me from YouTube's algorithms, demonetization, pulling some of my YouTubes, and the same with Twitter, deleting some of my tweets. The full story of me coming out to blow the whistle on the CIA, you can find that at my website, fortheloveoffreedom.net. And I present the Shipp brief, daily accounts of what's going on across the nation that people need to know about. And I post them there daily, 7 days a week. There will always be one posted, an update on the Shipp brief on fortheloveoffreedom.net. You can follow me on Twitter at Kevin_Shipp. I keep my eye as a watchdog on the federal government, the shadow government, and the deep state every single day. And if something pops up, I send it out to you. My Gmail, personally, if you'd like to contact me, is forloveof, there's no the there, forloveoffreedom@gmail.com. And I hope you all enjoyed this beginning of our series, CI Officer Goes Off the Grid. And I hope you join me on the next program. Thank you.